Okay, so ready for a deep dive into something I really love talking about?
Let me guess.
Education.
Knew it. What do you dug up this time?
Oh, it's juicy. We're going back to 1922 England.
All right. Almost 100 years ago. Setting the scene for us.
Right, so they had this new law making kids who left school at 14.
14. Can you imagine nowadays?
I know, right? But these kids, they still had to go to these continuation schools. Few hours a week.
Catch-up classes, basically.
Kind of. But this article we're looking at from the Parents' Review, it gets fired up about what those hours should be FOR.
Not just like learning to be a blacksmith or whatever if you're done at 14.
Exactly. They're like, hold on, education. That's about shaping minds, not just filling jobs.
Which, honestly, we're still debating that a century later.
Right. So the article is called The Scope of Continuation Schools. And they start by getting all, like, philosophical.
Oh, I love it when they get deep. Lay it on me.
They compare the time right after Napoleon, early 1800s, to their present day, which was just after World War I.
Both eras grappling with, okay, how do we move on from this mess?
And they're saying education, that's part of the answer, but not just any education. Had to be the right kind, clearly. Did they have examples?
Oh, yeah. They point to this group in Prussia, the Tugendbund. They were all about reviving their nation's spirit after Napoleon, but not through, like, military might, through philosophy and history.
Okay, using ideas as their weapons, I like it. Who were they inspired by?
Big names for the time, Voltaire, Rousseau. The Tugendbund, they wanted to shape national character through education. Can you imagine?
Bold move, right?
Yeah.
Makes you think, what are the PLUE shaping with our education systems today? But okay, so back to 1922 and this article.
Right, so they get into this big debate, utilitarian versus humanistic education. Utilitarian, that's a practical skills, job training stuff.
And humanistic, that's the well-rounded citizen, lover of learning, all that.
You got it. In this article, they are team humanistic all the way.
No shocker there, coming from the Parents' Review, but I'm sure they had good reasons. Oh, they bring receipts. They quote this guy from a century earlier, a Mr. Lecky, who said, focusing education just on jobs, that's profoundly immoral.
Whoa, fighting words. But it shows how long this debate's been going on.
Right. It's not just about, can this kid get a job? It's, what kind of person are we making?
So if not just job training, what did they want these continuation schools to be doing?
Well, they point to these people's high schools in Denmark as a model.
Interesting, Denmark. Weren't they also hit hard by the Napoleonic Wars?
Exactly. And these schools were part of their rebuilding, but not just like bricks and mortar. It was about rebuilding their shared culture, their spirit as a nation.
So education is a way to heal, essentially. But how does that translate to, like, everyday life for these 14-year-olds?
Well, they have this great anecdote about a shop in Sweden.
Oh, sweet. Okay, now I'm lost.
So, picture this. Little shop selling, like, cabbages, everyday stuff. But then there's this whole shelf crammed with books.
Dickens, Thackeray, the works.
You guessed it. And they're saying, even in this ordinary place, that shared knowledge, it sparks something. Makes for a better society, they say.
I like the image, but is it really that simple? Like, bookshelves in grocery stores equal utopia.
Well, they do acknowledge there's more to it than that. They talk about this problem of incuria, which basically means apathy in education.
Makes sense. You can lead a kid to knowledge, but you can't make them think, right?
Right, and this is where they get really interesting. They say there's been this huge e-discovery in education. Bigger than the alphabet, they claim.
Okay, now you have to tell me, what's this earth-shattering discovery?
They call it the act of knowing.
The act of knowing. All right, you've got my attention. What does that even mean? It's about, well, actually knowing something, not just hearing it.
Okay, but how is that different from just, like, remembering facts?
It's deeper than that. It's about wrestling with the information, making connections, relating it to your own life.
So it's not just passive, it's like you're active in the learning process.
Exactly. And they argue this active engagement, it's how you make knowledge stick, how you build those critical thinking muscles.
Which makes sense, right? Like, I remember back in school, if I had to explain something to someone else, I learned it way better.
That's exactly what they're getting at. And this is where their love of the humanities really shines through.
They were big on history, literature, philosophy, all that good stuff. But how do you go from, like, reading Shakespeare to, I don't know, not starting a war?
Well, they believed these subjects. They teach you how to think critically, how to analyze, interpret, form your own opinions.
So it's less about memorizing dates and more about learning how to think for yourself.
Exactly. And they point to England's public schools as an example. Now, this is a bit confusing, but back then, public school actually meant what we'd call elite private schools today.
It's funny how language works like that.
Right. But anyway, they argued that what made those public school students successful wasn't just, fancy classrooms.
It was this shared cultural background, this strong foundation in critical thinking.
They could all, quote the same poems, understand the same historical references, even if they disagreed on the specifics.
So it created this common ground, a shared way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
And they wanted that for everyone, not just the wealthy elite.
Exactly. They saw those continuation schools as a way to bridge that gap, to give working class kids a taste of that same enriching education.
Okay, I like where they're going with this, but practically speaking, how do you pull that off? We're talking about a few hours a week, right?
Right. So they weren't talking about cramming in a whole curriculum. They emphasized the importance of active recall. So reading something deeply and then retelling it.
Oh, so not just reading it, but actually having to explain it back.
Yes, orally or even better, in writing. They said that act of recalling and reflecting, it made the information stick.
Which honestly makes total sense. It's like that saying, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
Exactly. And they were also big on exposing students to a variety of subjects, not just drilling down into one thing.
So a little taste of everything.
Yeah.
To spark curiosity, maybe?
Precisely. And they wanted it to be engaging. They weren't about to make these kids suffer through boring lectures, literature, history, science even. They saw it all as a way to ignite the imagination.
So not just memorizing facts, but really understanding the story of human knowledge.
Right. And they were aware that traditional education had its critics. People saying it was out of touch, irrelevant. They wanted to take the good stuff, that core of learning how to think, and make it accessible.
Kind of like a greatest hits of knowledge.
In a way, yeah. And it's fascinating because we're still having these conversations today, right? About making education relevant, engaging, accessible to everyone.
Totally. It's like this article, it gives us this window into the past, but the questions are still so relevant.
Exactly. What should we be teaching? How should we be teaching it? Who should have access to what?
Big questions. And they had some bold ideas. So they weren't just talking the talk, right? They actually got into the specifics of what they wanted these continuation schools to look like.
Oh yeah, they got down to brass tacks. Laid out a whole sample curriculum for 14 to 16-year-olds.
Okay, let me guess. Blacksmithing, home economics, all the practical stuff.
Not quite. They had English, French, history, literature, citizenship, morals, natural history, geography, science, even scripture.
Whoa, that's ambitious. Are you sure these kids were only going for a few hours a week?
I know, right? It's like they were determined to pack as much in as possible.
Oh, were they realistic? Did they genuinely think this could solve all of society's problems?
I mean, it does sound a bit like a magic cure-all, doesn't it? Just add education and stir.
Right. Were they really that optimistic about the power of a few hours in the classroom?
Well, they weren't blind to the fact that the world is messy and complicated, but they definitely believed in this idea of a shared foundation of knowledge. If we all have a common understanding of history, of literature, of how the world works.
It could help bridge those divides and create a more stable, maybe even more peaceful society.
Exactly. And remember, they were writing at a time of a lot of social unrest. Strikes, labor movements, that kind of thing.
So they saw a direct connection between a lack of education and some of these societal problems.
Right. And it's not just about, knowing facts. It's about developing critical thinking skills, forming your own opinions, being able to engage in thoughtful debate.
So a well-educated mind, it's less likely to be swayed by extremes, less likely to fall into despair.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to navigate the complexities of the world and to contribute to making it a better place.
And that's a powerful idea, even 100 years later.
It really is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating article, what do you think is the biggest takeaway for us today?
I think it's a reminder that these questions about education, they're timeless. What should we be teaching? How should we be teaching it? Who should have access to it?
We're still wrestling with those questions today, just like they were back in 1922.
Exactly. And this article, it reminds us that it's not just about, getting good grades or getting a good job.
It's about shaping the kind of society we want to live in.
And that's a responsibility we all share, whether we're educators, parents, or just, engaged citizens.
Absolutely. Well, that was quite a journey through the world of early 20th century education.
Fascinating stuff.
To everyone listening, as you go about your day, maybe give some thought to that feast of knowledge we're offering the next generation. What are they learning? And how can we help them not just survive, but thrive in this ever-changing world.
It's something worth thinking about.
It really is. Thanks for joining me for another deep dive. Until next time.